Good evening, beautiful people. Welcome to another live episode of HollerCast. We are so glad you're here. And boy, this one's been a long time coming, Josh.
Oh, yeah.
Long time coming. We were just saying, Alex Glover, this was the first person he recommended to us on our first episode, right?
Yep. It was. And since day one, we've been talking about getting David on the show. So
absolutely.
I'm stoked.
Well, our guest today is a local historian extraordinaire and a newly minted radio personality.
Well, I don't know about newly
and our
minted.
friend, David Biddix.
Hello.
Man, it's good to spend time with you this evening. Thanks for being here.
Looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Absolutely, man. So we've done... This will be our second history podcast in a row. We had Mr. Michael C. Hardy on here last week. And man, we're just going to kick it off and run with it. So when I'd originally reached out to you, I told you that I wouldn't mind to just start. You asked me where you wanted to start or what we wanted to cover, and I told you, why don't we start from the beginning?
Oh my!
So we were chatting a little bit before the podcast started here and talking about the history. What we knew of the Toe River Valley was mostly as a Native American hunting ground.
Originally, that was what everybody thought it would be. Yes,
but you told me that history is changing.
It is starting to morph, I guess would be the word. But there's found a lot of new evidence that this valley where we live was much more valuable, let's say, to the Native Americans than we realized in the past.
Wow.
Right.
Of course, like you mentioned, for many, many years, it was always said the Toe River Valley had no settlements. It was, at best, a place where they hunted, maybe hung out in the summertime, things along that line. But now, archaeology work has been done in the Old Fort area and over in Micaville and all down around Mount Mitchell and all in that area that's uncovering a story of mining, which makes perfect sense, guys.
Absolutely.
Look where we're at, But they were there, and they were mining thousands of years ago here.
Wow.
And that meant not only were they here just subsisting, but they were thriving. They were doing things that you wouldn't necessarily find them doing if they were just dropping in to pick up dinner, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, it seems like that's the thing that, as a person who somewhat follows, a lot of history podcasts, and, I think for a lot of people it's hard not to have heard about it by now, but, sounds like to me the history of the ancients in North America, that history as a whole is being rewritten.
Yes, and it's about time. It really is.
Sure.
And I'm not saying, an ethnocentric, I guess, is the fair word to use there, but the fact that we're stepping back now and discovering, or at least paying attention, I guess would be the better way to say it, of what's there, plus new technology. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we're able now to uncover things that we didn't know before.
Absolutely.
And this work is going on with the U.S. Forest Service. In fact, we had a fellow, his name is Scott Ashcraft. I went to a program of his back in the summer, and we're hoping, by the way, to have him up here next year to give this program. But he talked about the discoveries that they've made and how the Native Americans, let's say, figured out, that's probably not a good word, but they had a way of mining where they used nature to help them do their mining. So they're after a lot of mica. That's the big thing. They used it in trade. They used it as money. I mean, they used it for a lot of different things. I think Alex even talked to you all about how they would wear it in ceremonial garb.
Sure.
So they were after that, and of course it makes its way all over the southeastern United States and all the way out into Ohio. They found mica from the Sinkhole Mine in Mitchell County in Ohio at one time.
Is there a way to identify maybe you would know this. Is there a way to identify where those minerals come? I suppose there is.
I mean, yeah, I guess you would have to probably look at it under a mass spec and then compare it with samples from that area.
From that area, yeah.
And then you would get a pretty good idea if it matched or not.
That's the reason I've always found geology fascinating, because I mean, at a certain point, I studied meteorology in college, and really past a certain point, the study of climate and meteorology, long before we had records, is really just a study of geology right. Honestly. So that's the reason I always find it fascinating. And how cool is it that that's our MO here?
Yeah.
Right.
Sweet.
Yeah, so what they do, they dig into the sides of the mountains, and they'd find a vein that they wanted to work, and they let Mother Nature do the work for them. They would dig it out to a certain level, and then they would depend on rain. And they were smart enough to know that we would occasionally have a hurricane or some sort of something to have that season in the late summer, and they would use that then to uncover or wash away the cover, and then they come back in and mine it later.
Leveraging the power of nature.
And not only that, they use the rocks in our area, the feldspars, the pegmatites. They would use those to make their tools. And that's one of the ways they know this happened is they found hundreds of thousands of these tools discarded in the region.
Really?
Where they were digging with them. And Scott talks all about that. And that to me is really interesting that we found that out. And it brings a whole new level to the importance of our area. And again, we've always talked about mining with us. Now, well, folks, it's been important here for 3,000 years.
Wow.
I mean, that really just says it all right there.
Yeah.
We really are the mineral city.
Yeah. Yeah.
No joke. No joke. That's crazy. Well, listen, I wanted to touch on something we just went over just a minute ago. So, it seems like in a lot of the things you watch about, beginning to look and question what we've always thought we knew about like ancient cultures in the Americas as a whole. You as a historian and somebody who's deeply involved in that, is there truth to the fact that, or to what the story you've always heard, that there's a tendency to be stuck in a rigid ideology when it comes to history?
Yeah, I think so.
Why do you have a sense of why that is?
Well, I mean, it could be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I mean, it could, in the past, especially, it was a racial element. If you had a group. I mean, we can go all the way back to the poor mountaineers.
Right.
That was disenfranchised in some way. Then their story either got shoved to the back, or not told or not explored because, well, why do we want to know about them? It's kind of like this about the mining. I mean, the fact that that's been uncovered really in the last 5 years, that has become more and more important.
Right.
And that's the sort of thing I think we're seeing now, that people, between technology and the fact that everybody has a story to tell, and we want to make sure that story gets out there, no matter who you are.
I wonder if any of their studies with this. What was his name? The geologist,
Scott Ashcraft.
Scott Ashcraft. Yeah. I wonder if any of their studies with the National Forest Service and things like that have to do with like LIDAR.
Yes,
because I mean, it seems to me that technology is almost making it. You hear about this where they're surveying the Amazon rainforest with LIDAR and finding all these ancient cities and civil evidence of civilizations that we've never seen before. I mean, who knows? What if we do that for all of North America? What does that? It's kind of hard to deny.
It is, and it's. I guess history and coincides side by side with science in this aspect, that it has to be, it's not infallible. So if we find out that what we've thought this whole time has been wrong, we're going to have to go back and revise everything.
Yeah.
If we're good scientists and historians. Now, I know a lot of people don't do that. There's egos involved.
Right.
Big egos involved when you got people's entire life's work. Invested into this stuff,
and whole organizations that are formed around that story, tale of the way things happen. And when you upend that, you're going to inevitably piss somebody off.
For sure.
Yeah,
you are.
Yeah. So,
you talked about the LIDAR. That, of course, has been something that's stepped in with the Spanish story, which we've not gotten to yet. But
Go
the
for
Spanish
it, man.
actually came up in here, and they interacted with these Native Americans in the 1540 time frame.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is that the first evidence of a European interacting with people of this area? Okay.
Yeah, so in 1540, Hernando de Soto comes to North America in the Florida area, and he is looking for a route to get to the mines that the Spanish have in silver and gold down in Mexico. And so they lead him up into the southeastern United States, and he comes to a place called Jawara, or Walla, Xuala is its name, and it's in Burke County. Now, you were talking about LIDAR. That's how they have confirmed what's in Burke County is the fort that belonged to the Spanish.
So for people that might not be familiar, can you explain LIDAR?
Yeah.
Exactly what
yeah.
it is?
So in essence, it's a radar of the underground is what is going on there. And so basically he comes to Jawara because that was a very important settlement. And he meets up with a chiefess or whatever. Her name was Kafita Cheki. And
Kafita Cheki.
Yeah. And basically, talking about our, racist whatever. He's after gold. He's after riches. In addition to finding this way, to the west. So he basically kidnaps her and says, "Take me to where I want to go." So she decides to haul him up in the mountains.
Wow.
And while she's hauling him up in the mountains, she's going to lose him up there.
Right,
That's the idea behind it, at least. So she does. She gets up here and slips off. But now, what a lot of people don't know, she leaves Jawara, which is later home to a place called Fort San Juan. Well, that's what I'm talking about with the LIDAR, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So anyway, she takes him up, basically, to Avery County, Avery Burke, where they come together up there, on 7 Mile, or not 7 Mile Ridge, but on 181.
Right.
And descend down the North Toe River Valley. And she slips off from him. But she tells him, you follow the river. Well, the river is what? The North Toe River. Okay. Yep. So this is, roughly around where the prisons are at. Somewhere in that area.
Wow.
And they start down. And so, yes, Hernando de Soto walked through downtown Spruce Pine in 1540. Wow. Of course, you didn't know it at the time.
Right.
But yeah, so he walks and he follows the Toe River. They go over into what is now Tennessee, or as they called it back then, Tanasi. And that was a name the Native Americans gave the region of a community over there. And, of course, all along the way, they are kind of prospecting and, looking for riches and stuff. But he continues on west and, of course, eventually gets all the way to the Mississippi River and passes away. And then they turn around and come back. But then 27 years later, this is 20 years before the English even think about North America in terms of settlement.
Right.
You have a fella by the name of Juan Pardo. And he is sent back again, and he comes the same route as De Soto comes. But instead of starting in Florida, which is where De Soto started, he starts down near Charleston, South Carolina. And he comes up the hinterlands of South Carolina and back to Jawara. And there he establishes the first settlement on the interior of the United States continent, or the North American continent.
The first European settlement.
Right. And
so why are we always told that was Roanoke?
Well, that is the first English settlement.
First English settlement.
Gotcha.
Okay. This would have been the first European settlement in the interior. And that's why I said the interior. Because, there's evidence that you had Vikings and whatever up in Canada.
Right. Gotcha.
But this on the interior, and he establishes what's called Fort San Juan. And he leaves some of his soldiers at Fort San Juan, and he heads on up into the mountains, again, seeking gold, fortune. He is not doing De Soto, pardon me. Excuse me. He's not doing a De Soto where he's looking for a way to Mexico. He is, but he's not.
Yeah.
He's really looking for riches, and they come all up in here. And basically what happens is the Native Americans, the Spanish kind of wore out their welcome with them. So they make a decision, we're going to get rid of these guys. So basically they kill all of them but one. And they take the one and they tell him to go back and tell the folks that they're no longer welcome here. And so he's turned loose and sent back to Santa Elena, which is down in South Carolina now, and basically delivers the news that
you don't go here.
Your colony is wiped out that you tried to establish. Of course, now this colony is a group of men.
Right.
Okay. This is not a.
It's more of an encampment.
Right. It's a military thing. It's not really like we would think of with women and children and whatever.
Right.
But the point being, I say luck. But there were a couple of archaeologists, one in particular, his name's Robin Beck. His family owned the land where this is happening, and of course they're finding artifacts.
Wow.
And he is a young archaeologist. He's got a couple of buddies that he convinces to come and do an archaeological survey. And they go down into Jawara, and over the 30 years, actually it's 40 years since they started, Goodness, this is.
Oh, you're
getting
good.
to
Take
me
your
there.
time,
Yeah,
bro.
let me have a drink here.
Go for it.
You gotta wet your whistle every now and
Every
then.
once in a while.
Yeah.
But anyways, they more and more made the case that this is more than just an Indian village.
Right.
And so they decide to start doing typical archaeological things and digging out an area. And they find what they think is a moat. Okay?
Okay.
And the Spanish would have built a moat
Sure.
around whatever fort that they would have created. And so they keep working the area. And eventually, and this was about 5 years ago, the decision is made to bring in LIDAR, which is what's a ground-penetrating radar. And it basically looks at the differences of the soil, and in this case, organic matter, where posts were at, things of that nature. And they mapped the entire fort. They mapped
Really?
everything.
And this is where?
This is in Burke County, just north of Morganton.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, it's there. There's
Right,
no
for
doubt.
sure.
They
Yeah.
have found it.
Yeah.
And but the point being is we are uniquely tied to that because we had DeSoto in Mitchell County, in 1540.
Well, it's even just the Europeans in this area to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
And of course, then it's 150 years before you really start having them start showing back up here, and this is in the mid 1700s.
Right.
And of course, at that time, you had English colonies all along the coast, and they're starting to push inland. And the idea here is we got to stop this because there's starting to be a little bit of friction between the Native Americans and the
European settlers.
settlers. So, King George establishes what's called the Proclamation of 1763, and basically it is where the fall. Well, I call it the fall line, but it's the Eastern Continental Divide now.
Right. Of course.
Or the escarpment, the edge of the Blue Ridge Escarpment from there west was off limits. So that was what it was supposed to be. But now we know,
really, this was the edge of the frontier.
yes,
At one point.
At one point, this was the frontier. Where you're
Isn't
at.
it so funny how that story, though, like even going back to the DeSoto thing and what was the gentleman,
Oh, the Wampardo.
Pardo, how that story plays out over and over again. That plays out in the Civil War. That
Yeah.
plays out in the Revolutionary War. Like, if you want to lose somebody, bring them to the mountains. It was
Right.
like this was the place to lose everybody. It
Yes.
really was the frontier. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, anyway, sorry.
So you had
continue.
a few that settled up in here. The most noted one that I know of is Samuel Bright. Now, there's a couple of guys that settled over in the Yancey County region near Mount Mitchell. Their names escape me right now. If I had Jonathan Bennett here, that's another one you ought to get on here at some point. He could talk more about them.
Right.
But Samuel moves up here. He is here before or after 1763, so he's not supposed to be here.
Gotcha.
Okay?
And so, what kind of character was he? Do we have an idea?
Well, we know a little bit about Sam, which we'll get into
Okay.
here. He comes into the region, and of course he puts in a house and everything. And in case you're wondering where this is at, if you know where Sabelco's Schoolhouse Quartz Plant is,
Right.
that's where our buddy Sam Bright was settled.
Nice.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I bet you didn't know that.
No, I know where Schoolhouse Quartz Plant is very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
He actually had a house there. He and his wife, and they had everything kind of settled. And of course, more come in. Davenport's come up here. You've probably heard of Davenport Springs on the property there at
Yeah.
Sabelco.
Yeah.
Okay, that is part of this. But if you ride down Franklintown, you will see a Bright's Trace Road. And that's what I was going to talk about next. You hear the term Bright's Trace. Okay, it's basically a footpath. And it comes up the mountain. And it actually wends its way up Pepper's Creek. And then it follows up what's called Rose's Creek. But then it comes out on the Tow River over in that area.
Wow.
And that was at that time, you left on from there and went up Roaring Creek and over into Tennessee.
Wow.
That was how the Watauga Association, you hear the
Right.
state of Franklin
Right.
and John Sevier and all these guys, that's how they came.
That's all.
They came
all
up
through
that
there.
way, yeah.
That's a very distinct path. So you're talking from down there, basically at Baxter's,
Right.
up Pepper's Creek, then up what? Sorry, what was that called?
Well, they come up Pepper's Creek,
Creek,
and then
the
it's
next
called
one-
Rose's Creek.
Rose's
and
Creek.
There is still a Rose's Creek in Allapass,
Right.
if you know where you're looking.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, gotcha.
But-
And then up Roaring Creek.
Yeah. and over into Tennessee.
And that's
Elizabeth.
Roaring Creek. Basically, if you follow that over, that comes out in Bakersville, doesn't it? Or close to Bakersville.
No,
that's
Henson's Creek.
Henson's Creek.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Roaring Creek crosses the Rhone.
Oh yeah. Okay, I got
Cross
you.
the
I
Mountain.
got you. I got you.
But yeah, that's how you get the Watauga Association and what turns in later the Over Mountain Men. In fact, they follow that same trail back down here,
Right.
To go to Kings Mountain.
Wow.
But that was an early trail.
Footpath.
It was an animal trail. It was an Indian trail.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very, very vital link between, at that time, the frontier and what was over in North Carolina.
So at that point, David, what would be let's put ourselves back there and we come through here. What would be the chances that you would encounter like a Native American?
Oh, you would encounter them all the time, yes.
For sure.
Right. Yeah.
Got you. So at that point, they were well established.
They
in this
were
area.
here, yes.
Yeah, they were definitely here.
But they didn't have huge villages, okay?
Right.
We have two that we know of, one up Cane Creek in Bakersville, and the other one on Cane River, where Cane River School is in Yancey County.
Really?
The two that we know are confirmed settlements. Where they were at.
Okay.
But again, they're not huge. Okay.
Right.
They're not.
So we're talking about just a small village.
We're talking about some sort of small village. And this is after what I'll call ancients, the Mississippian tribes that would have been here thousands of years ago.
Right.
These would have been Cherokee, Catawba, maybe a little bit of the Iroquois would slip down here occasionally, but that's the Native Americans you would have seen in the region.
Was this a contested area for them, or was it just...
No, I don't think they contested it. Not like the Trail of Tears and all of that.
Right.
Nothing like that.
Right.
Because again, Samuel comes up in here. He's here. Really at the dawn of the Revolutionary War. He doesn't die here though. He comes here. Actually, he and his wife get in a little bit of a scrape with a peddler,
Really?
which is kind of funny. The peddler accuses her of stealing some cloth, and basically they kind of confirm it. Well, they lash her. They actually tie her to a tree and lash her back,
cow.
As punishment. And right after that, Sam and her pick up and leave. And they end up down in Georgia. We do know they make it to Georgia at some point. But now where he ends up at, I don't know. We've never found out, what he went. But Bright's Trace was what they called the road. Excuse me. And that's how you got to the Watauga settlement.
I got you.
And later, what turns into the state of Franklin, and then what later is Tennessee.
I'm just trying to think, too. What's the first evidence we have of, like, because everybody around here claimed, I'm part Cherokee. But we touched on a little bit on that with Michael. He's like, that might be exaggerated, and also maybe not even Cherokee, but more Catawba.
Yeah.
Because that might have, from what he told us, that was more prevalent around here, probably.
Right. Yeah.
Got you. So what evidence do we have? What's the first evidence we have of intermarrying between Native Americans and European settlers?
Don't really have
Don't
all
really.
that much.
Really?
At least documented. I mean, there is, I'm sure, going on, but not a tremendous amount. DNA is doing a lot of that for us.
Sure,
now,
absolutely.
Sort of
I'd be interested to see how far that actually goes back, because everybody, and I can see, I mean, obviously into more modern times, I'm sure, but like, what's the first evidence of that happening? I'd be really interested to see that. So that brings us up to roughly the Revolutionary War, right?
Well, of course, now we've talked about the fact that, we've got Bright's Trace. Well, there's a second trail
Okay.
that a lot of folks don't know about. That is now today's North Carolina Highway 226. It is a Revolutionary War trail that goes across from the Watauga settlement down into Unicoi County, across Iron Mountain to what is now Bakersville, and on out to Spruce Pine. Now, the interesting thing about this, my goodness, sorry about this, fella.
Oh, you're fine,
The
man.
air keeps
Trust me.
blowing down and making my nose
Dude,
itch
it's
right
that time
there.
of year. It's getting into fall. The temperatures are changing, everything.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
No,
Anyways,
I'm good with it. Turn it down a little. We're good.
anyways, that is something a lot of folks don't know, that there was actually a Revolutionary War trail there, but it has a real neat piece of history about it, okay?
Okay.
So, like I said, that trail is there. And later, Jonathan Tipton. Does that name sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially in
Tipton
Yancey
Hill
County.
fame?
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. So Jonathan is over in the Watauga settlement.
Okay.
And he gets into it with some of his folks, and he decides to come back into North Carolina, back into what is now Mitchell County, and he forms Tipton Hill, what we know as Tipton Hill. So, but he came across this road, and you've probably heard of the little battle at Tipton Haynes Farm between John Severe's group, and there's it's Jonathan Tipton's brother that's involved in. Yeah, they get into shooting and everything, and
little Hatfields and McCoy's action over there.
Well, actually, no, it's more because Severe is kind of stirring the pot. He's wanting to start a new state, and North Carolina doesn't want to make that a state. They want that to stay a part of North Carolina. So, anyways, they arrest him. And the idea is they're going to bring him back to Morganton to stand trial. So they pick him up after this little battle at the Tipton Haynes house. And, of course, you can go and visit that in Johnson City right now. But they bring him back, and they're going to put him into Morganton. The decision is made, for whatever reason, not to go on Bright's Trace. They decide to come through Bakersville.
Okay.
And some decisions were made, let's say, that they were going to take John and they were going to take care of their problem, if you know what I'm saying.
So they were going to take him out behind the shed and put him out of his misery.
Put him out of their misery.
Right.
Okay, is what they were going to do.
Yeah.
So the legend, and again, this is a legend, is that they started up Iron Mountain to get to the top, and they're going to knock him off on top of Iron Mountain.
Okay.
And for some reason, they chicken out, of course. And they make their way on to Morganton. And when he gets to Morganton, they're going to put him on trial. But he I guess, woos everybody. He gets elected to the North Carolina legislature. And so he goes as a representative then for that area, what's called the Washington District. He becomes their legislator, and he goes on to Raleigh. And, of course, later he is the first governor of the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
You know. But yeah, so there's a little bit of story there on the Iron Mountain that a lot of people don't know about.
Wow, that's cool.
And one of the cool things about that is we've been doing the work on the race riot here in Spruce Pine.
Sure.
Part of that involves the building of highways, and the highways 19E and 226. Well, if you look at them, they basically follow Bright's Trace to more or less into Avery County and across to Elizabethton, and 226 across Iron Mountain. And it is referenced in the state highway from documents from that time that was originally a Revolutionary War trail, but it's now Highway 226. A lot of folks don't know that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a neat little something. So,
well, it makes sense. It's hard to get around here. I mean, you can imagine now. Like sometimes even I'm like, God, you go on some back roads around here, you really got to pay attention.
Yeah.
You know, imagine what it was like trying to get through these mountains on foot. I mean, I would imagine those trails and those things would be so important, and it stands to reason that they would be along the same places where we have them now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, makes sense.
And of course, now Sevier makes a trip back down the road, the Bright's Trace, in 1780. In fact, not long before where we're at right now in terms of the time of the year, and when the Overmountain men form up at Sycamore Shoals, and then they march back down Bright's Trace, and they march across Roan Mountain, which had snow on it in late September of 1780. They talk about marching through the snow, shoe-mouth deep on top of the Roan, and they end up down at the Davenport Springs area, which is Bright's Trace, and then they come on down into Spruce Pine, and where Grassy Creek joins the Toe River, they turn up there, and then follow that out to where the golf course is today. And 1,000 of them camped there on September 28th, 1780.
Dang. Right out there on the...
They are right there.
Ninth green.
Yeah.
Right there at the clubhouse.
Yep. And there's a
beer store.
Yeah, or the old beer store.
Yep. And there were 1,000 of them. So guys, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good size.
And why there? You have any ideas?
Let me think. No, I don't have any ideas.
Well, of course, now we've got the routes down off the mountain.
Yeah.
Here. There's actually two of them, which we'll talk about in a moment. But they camped there because there's this nice, flat, open space that's referred to as Kathy's Plantation. Okay. Now, there's something that we'll hit on a couple things about that for this area. So, first of all, they camp there because it's open. It's animals graze there, so there's plenty of room for them to spread out and camp. They spend the night there. Then they're going on down the mountain the next day to Morganton, to Quaker Meadows. Is where they're all on their way to. But anyways, they pick Kathy's Plantation because it's nice and open, and they know that it's there, and he will let them stay there. So that's how they end up spending the night in that area. But while they're there, they realize that a couple of the guys that were with them when they left Elizabethton actually deserted on top of the Rhone at the top of Roaring Creek. And they realize they're gone. Well, what they're worried about, those guys have run off to tell Patrick Ferguson, and we hadn't even got into Kings Mountain, but this is the fella from Britain that had come into the Western Carolinas to basically quell the insurrection against the British. He wanted to put this down, and he basically was coming up here, and he made the boast, that he was going to lay waste to their land with fire and sword, if they didn't lay down their weapons. And you just don't threaten a mountaineer that way. You just don't. And those guys were mountaineers. Let's face it. They lived up in here. They came up in here because they didn't want to be bothered, and they wasn't going to put up with him. So they're worried about him getting word. So they get to this camp area, and the decision is made. Well, there's a couple of routes down off the mountain. Okay, there is the route down Peppers Creek, Roses Creek, down through there, and then there's another route out at Little Switzerland, which is where today is the Big Lynn Lodge, and that belonged to Henry Gillespie, and it was called Gillespie's Turnpike. And he would charge you to go up and down it.
Of Gillespie's Gap fame.
Of Gillespie Gap fame.
Sure.
Yes. And he would charge you to go up and down his turnpike, is what he did at that time. Of course,
he had a toll road going on.
He had a toll road.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what
Smart
it was.
man.
Yeah.
What does Jimmy always say? I like self-monetizing ventures.
Self-funding ventures.
Self-funding ventures. All right. Yeah.
So they're worried again that these guys have run off to tell Ferguson that he's going to ambush them. So the decision is made to split their forces. And so by commanders, they divide them up. And half of them head back up Alta Pass and Roses Creek and Peppers Creek and down that way. The other half go out to Little Switzerland and go down Gillespie Gap or Henry Gillespie's toll road. But they pick up old Gillespie because he is maybe or maybe not a supporter of the revolution. So they're worried about that. So the decision is made to arrest him, detain him, whatever you want to call it, until they get gone, and get down the mountain. And that's
because they don't want him to run off and tell Ferguson.
Yeah, they don't want him to run off and tell Ferguson. But fortunately, Ferguson ain't got word about him being there. So, they managed to, both sides, get down the mountain and get to Quaker Meadows, form back up, and head on to Kings Mountain. But they spent the night in our area.
Wow.
And the other interesting thing about that, or I think it's kind of a little interesting trivia type thing, is, first of all, we have something in our county, in Spruce Pine, that a lot of folks don't realize exists. The largest log structure in North Carolina is in Spruce Pine. Now, do you know what it is?
The English Inn. The
English Inn, that's right. Now, why do I mention it in with this? Mr. William Cathy, he had a place he called the Plantation, but he had a cabin here at some point. We don't know this, but we think there's a portion of today's English Inn that was part of that cabin.
It was originally Cathy's cabin.
Cathy's cabin. Yes.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, this area back out toward the golf course and all that out through there was where he put up his cattle and everything, the summertime livestock. But
so while we're here, can you tell us a little bit about Isaac English and when he came, or is that out of chronological order?
Not too much out of chronological order, but let's stop real quick and just say that, we have the Revolutionary War. It is over. And this area is, of course, then open to settlement. But it's still, let's face it, hard to get in here.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I mean, the trails at best are foot trails.
Right.
Coming back, let me real quickly hit back on Gillespie. Okay? That's a toll road, but it was a toll road in name only. It was basically a path through the woods.
Right.
So like if there were a couple of wagons and they were one coming up the mountain and one going down the mountain and they met, they would disassemble one of them, set it off to the side, let the other one pass, then put that one back together so it could head on up the mountain.
So that's how tiny
it
Right,
was.
right.
Yeah. So it's not, what you would think of as a road. And that's what it was here, really up into the early 1900s. Okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
We might touch on this a little bit later, but the point I'm trying to drive home is it's isolated.
Yeah.
Right.
It is hard to get to. It's hard to get around once you're up in here. So the people who come here, they are not coming here to make a fortune. Yeah, they want the land, and at that time, land was worth a tremendous amount.
Right.
Okay. But they move here because of the isolation. They want away from people. They want to do their own thing. In this case, they have to raise their own food. They have to do everything for themselves. So
it really is totally subsistence.
Is totally subsistence. And that plays into all the way up into the early 1920s. Think about that. Okay, just think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
We're talking near 200 years of isolation for this area. And we'll hit on that a little bit more maybe if we have time later.
Boy, that's funny though, because I knew that.
Yeah.
But you don't realize how
You don't think
long.
about it. No.
I mean, it was my great aunt that raised me. She was born in 1907, I think, and she used to tell stories that her daddy told her about them taking a wagon down the mountain to marry, to go to market with stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, so you're talking that's late 1800s, early 1900s.
We're talking not
and they were
that
doing the
long
exact
ago.
same thing.
Yeah, that they were doing in
200 years
1780.
before that. Yeah. That's wild.
So have we
Exactly.
caught up yet? That's debatable.
I have seen a couple Teslas driving around here. Maybe we have.
But again, isolation.
Right.
Now, what does that breed in us? This isolation. Self-sufficiency. We can take care of ourselves. We don't need help from somebody
A
to take care of ourselves.
fierce independence.
And that is still here to some extent to this day.
Oh,
no
you think?
way.
But it is here because of that. Okay, that's not because somebody just wanted to,
So that literally is bred into
it is
us.
literally bred into the people that were in this region. Yes.
Wow.
And it stayed that way, like we said, on up into the 1920s.
Well, before we leave the Revolutionary War, and I asked Michael this kind of same thing, but what's your sense of what the general thoughts were about the Revolutionary War around here? Was it really just, did we, because, we touched on with him, everybody, you've always been told that, well, Mitchell County was formed because it was a Union county and Yancey County was a Confederate county. And apparently that's horseshit, pretty much.
Yeah.
But,
that's Civil War. Now, Revolutionary War, you had three groups.
Right.
Okay. You had the first third that was pro-British and wanted to be subjects of the king. You had the second third that wanted to have their own thing, be their own people. And a lot of those were your planters and the rich folks in the East. And it was an economic thing for them. They didn't want to pay the British taxes.
Right.
Then you had this other third that would be for whichever third was winning.
right.
So,
of course.
So in this area, you don't have a whole real sense other than you have the bunch from the Watauga area, and then some of them from here that formed up and go to Kings Mountain, and that was as much because of the threat.
Yeah.
Okay, they were threatened, and they weren't going to put up with it, and they went and hung the old boy up, so to speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I was getting at too is it seems like even that sort of thing persisted it persisted all the way through. Even through the Revolutionary War into the Civil War. That a lot of people, there wasn't really a whole lot of sides. It was either whichever one was convenient or leave me the hell alone, basically.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about the Civil War with that.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael's the better one of that. But we can touch on it briefly. But coming back to that, so what Kathy had his cabin here. He would drive his livestock up here. You'd have people that settled in the river bottoms or wherever they could, scratch out a living. But you didn't have a way to build industry. You didn't have roads to move stuff. In fact, it was easier for people here to get their goods to market at Charleston, South Carolina, than it was to take it into eastern North Carolina. So
what you're saying is the infrastructure has been an issue around here for a while.
It has been an issue here for a long time. But again, so that's how this is developed in the early 1800s, moving up into the middle 1800s. Kind of the same thing going on. We get to the Civil War.
Oh, what about Isaac English? I'm sorry. Are we still in that?
Yeah, well, Isaac
I'm interested because I grew up in the English woods, so we've played all over that place and every square inch of that area down in there. So what was his story?
All right, so Isaac, first off, he is in the region. He marries into a family that actually own the English Inn, and that's how he ends up with it. He marries into a family, and it was an inn before he got it. Okay, so it had been developed as a way station for people to stay. But now when the Civil War comes along, he's not there. He's actually up in Avery County. We'll go back to the Schoolhouse Quartz plant here again at a place called Yankee Rocks. And you all know where that's at on the Tow River?
It's up
the bend. You go up the Bent Road, and if you look up on the hill, you can see there's kind of an overhang. Okay, and that's the Yankee Rocks.
Okay, yeah, I know where you're at.
So anyways, Isaac is living up in that area, up in the Gooch's Creek area, whatever, right along with the Avery-Mitchell line. And he is, along with a lot of people here, they weren't the least bit interested in a war because they looked at it, again, in a practical thing. This has nothing to do, it has everything to do with slavery, but here it didn't. Because to these people, it is a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. That's the term that Rhonda Gunner has used. Because, they don't own slaves. They don't have a lot of land. They don't have, the economic wherewithal to have interest in this decision to split the Union. They would just as soon things stay like they are, and they are left alone in whatever. But, of course, North Carolina goes into the Confederacy. You do have a couple of groups here, especially in the Yancey County side, because there's more slaves in that side. And it's just simply because they had land in Yancey County and, more importantly, the money to afford to buy the people. Okay? They are pushing hard for us to join the Union. Right. To join the Confederacy. Now, we'll come back to the splitting of the counties here in just a moment. But anyway, so the decision is made to go into battle. So even with that, you do have groups from here that form up, different regiments and whatever, and go off to war. The 58th North Carolina is the one I'm sure Michael talked about when he was in here. Yeah. There's several others. Of course, some of them go to other units. But you do have a group, and Isaac English is one of them, that is against leaving the Union. So they are what are called red strings, and they wore a red string on their lapel. And that's how you knew
that they were
pro-union. Okay, so the story that plays out here that's of interest is Isaac is he's injured. He has a problem with the shoulder, and he can't go to battle. But they force him to do something for the war effort, and he goes to Cranberry every day from the Schoolhouse Quartz area to Cranberry to the mine to work in the iron mine every day. He would walk that every day. Okay?
And that was for the Union.
That was that was for the Confederacy.
That was for the Confederacy.
Yeah, even though he's for the Union, he has to work for the Confederacy in order, I guess, to keep the peace or whatever.
Right.
But he's up there, he's working. But word gets back, obviously, through the grapevine that here is a pro-Union supporter in this area. And not only that, Isaac makes a commitment to help people. And part of that involves helping prisoners of the North.
So this is okay. This is where I was going. This is going to be my next question because I've always heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are four soldiers, there are four officers, I guess I should say, that escaped from the Union camp. What? Or the Confederate camp.
Confederate camp. Yeah.
down in Columbia, South Carolina. And they start them north, and they tell them just different way stops where they can make. It's almost like an underground railroad, but it's not really the underground railroad.
That's what we had always heard. I'd always been told it was part of the Underground Railroad.
No,
but that's not the Underground Railroad we're talking about, though. Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
The Underground Railroad is slaves.
Right.
Okay. This is to spirit away Union soldiers.
Right.
So, these guys get loose. They come up, walking up through here. They come into Marion. They come on up the mountain, excuse me, and they meet Isaac in this area, and Isaac and his wife hide them. And then Isaac makes arrangements to get them back to the Union lines. It's actually Colonel Kirk's Raiders. You've probably had Michael talk a little bit about them. He gets them to Kirk's line over in Tennessee. Now,
what about Confederate dissidents? What about people that have jumped ship from the Confederacy? Is that same type of?
You have a
going?
lot of that. In fact, I've got a great granddad involved in all that.
Really? Okay.
We'll hit here in a minute.
Okay.
But anyway, so Isaac helps them get back. And what's really kind of interesting is Jonathan and I found a book that tells the story of these four guys. And we actually did a program at the English Inn about this with the Historical Society. It's on YouTube if you've never seen it, where we tell you their story and show you who they are.
Well, we'll put a link down below to that for sure. Yeah. Definitely want to do that.
Sorry, got a cramp.
It's easy to get sitting over there. Yeah, sit
There
a little
we go.
sideways. You can pull
There
that
we
thing with
go.
you.
Yep.
Yeah.
It cramped up there. But anyways, so the four of them got up here. He helped them get back. Now, the interesting part is in that story that I told you that one of them actually wrote into a book. He tells that eventually they end up meeting President Lincoln and telling about their experience.
Really?
And that was very interesting to me. He ends up there. Now, the other thing that's kind of wild out of that is one of them, his name is Gear. His last name is Gear, G-E-R-E. He is from Syracuse, New York. Now, while he's here, one of the things Isaac does is show him his collection of minerals and gems and stuff that he's found in the woods. And, of course, now, he's working the iron mine up at Cranberry, too. So, he's kind of into that. And about 20 years after the war, Gear shows back up and contacts Isaac and comes back for a visit. And at that time, Isaac is living at the English Inn. And Gear comes down, stays with him for a little bit. Isaac shows him, kind of what's going on here and that there's deposits of this stuff. And Gears decides to fund his operations. And that's how the English Mica Company comes into existence, which is one of the first quote-unquote mining companies in this region.
Wow,
and
really?
It's money that comes from this a Civil War colonel, and his name is Gear. And again, he's from Syracuse.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that's just a whole nother story there about the mining, but that's how one of the early mining companies in this region got started. Was strictly because he helped this fella in the Civil War.
Gotcha.
And then later he comes back and contacts him, and they have a long, where they talked with each other, and again he funded, English's work on starting the mica company.
Yeah. Do you have an idea where they first commercially mined for mica? What was the first commercial mine?
Sinkhole mine. Sinkhole mine. I mean, that was mined. In the 1850s. I mean, it was mined actually by the Native Americans thousands of years ago.
Right.
But in terms of commercial, I mean, Thomas Clingman of Clingman's Peak fame, after the Civil War, he had mining interests and he did work in the Sinkhole mine. Of course, you have Heap and Clapp that come over into the Bakersville area, and they go to the Clarisy mine and the Hawk mine, all up in there, and they work mica up in there too. And they're the ones who really came up with isinglass, which is a use for the mica, as a window in stoves and things. That's where that comes from, is out of that. But yeah, I mean, you had, all sorts of mining that had dabbled along, and I have a real cool story I tell you again about Schoolhouse here. You're just getting all sorts of stuff tonight. But you had mining dabbling along really in the 1810s, 20s, 30s, but at the same time, there's not a demand for it because they don't have uses for it at that time. Of course, it gets invented. Now, one of the interesting things about that in the 1850s, some folks, their last name is Childs, and they come and settle in our region on, guess where? the Schoolhouse Quartz property. Okay, Davenport Springs.
I'm just going to settle there myself, I think.
Well, I will tell you now, it's a beautiful piece of land that back in
It
there.
is. Oh, yes.
But they start a community that is called Childsville, and that is later Mitchell County's first county
seat. That's what I thought. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But the story about that, so Ebenezer and, of course, I'll forget the other one's name. Not the old man, but there's a couple of brothers. They move here and they buy up the mineral rights all up and down 3 Mile, and because at that time mining is starting to do some things in the 1850s. Of course, it gets shut down at the Civil War, but they never did anything with it. Now, what I find hilarious about that to what I laugh about today is what's there right now. Ultra pure quartz.
Right.
Okay.
Lots of pure quartz.
Now, what's funny about that is, they were wanting to become rich. Well, they were sitting on billions of dollars of money, which meant nothing at that time.
Right.
Yeah, that was literally a waste.
Yeah, it was a waste product
for them. Yeah.
But the point is, here they bought up all those rights all up through there. The Childs did, and then. Of course, they had no way of knowing what was there.
Sure, sure.
So did we have an idea of when, we always talk about mica and we talk about quartz. Do we have an idea of when they started using feldspar?
Yeah, we'll come to that early 1900s is really when that takes off.
Right.
But it really
Because it looks like to me, good grief, we make everything out of, tile, toilets, sinks, all that type of stuff. People don't realize. People don't understand.
How much, basically all your ceramics.
Yeah.
Through body porcelain tile, anything that's through body porcelain.
But that really didn't take off until after the 1940s when they invented what's called froth flotation, which you can talk all about.
right.
Yep. Yeah. Well, probably not legally, but yeah.
Yeah. but when that was invented, that really, for lack of a better term, freed quartz or freed feldspar, because all of a sudden we could pull these materials out more easily. Because before then they had to manually extract this stuff.
Right, which was very difficult.
It was very difficult, but then we were inventing uses for it. All sorts of things we can do with it. And we haven't even gotten into what happens with ultra pure quartz yet, or the Palomar mirror, and things of that. We can talk about that later. But yeah, the point is, this is going on. Really starting in the 1850s, and of course it dies down because of the war, and then it starts coming back late 1870s, 1880s. That's when Heap and Clapp come from Knoxville into the Bakersville area, and they start their work with mica. And you have English out here doing his mica stuff. And what was happening really, kind of like the Native Americans, the guys, they'd go into the hills and they would find, they'd grub a little bit and they'd find a vein of mica or or something, and they'd dig it out and they would load it up on the horse and they'd take it and sell it. And that's how that went for years. You had what they would do whenever they weren't growing the garden or doing any of that was they'd go grubbing the side of the hill, and then whatever they found they'd take it and sell it. And that went on for a long time.
Until railroads came around.
We hadn't even got into that yet. We're still talking isolation here.
Gotcha.
Let's keep that in mind. But the point is, again, this early work is starting, and we're starting to find uses for this stuff. And that starts encouraging more of it to happen. In particular, the mica was the first that took off. That was the really the first thing. And they found all sorts of uses for mica at the time. And then they started coming up with uses for the feldspar. And what was in the feldspar but the quartz? And at that time, quartz was a waste product. And it doesn't really come into its own until the 1930s. And then from the 30s on, and especially from the 1980s on, quartz is it.
Quartz is king.
We mine feldspar here, but we mine feldspar in a lot of places. We don't mine ultra pure quartz anywhere else in the world than right here. At least to the level we do.
Oh not at all.
But again, coming back to that, you got this isolation, so they've got this stuff here, but they don't have a way to get it out. And I mean out of the region. They can get it out of the ground, they can dig it out of the ground, but they haven't come up with a way to get it out of the region. And that's really how things stay until we hit the early 1900s. So let's go back to the Civil War, though. You were asking. Okay. You do have a lot of folks here who deserted. They would either leave just because they were tired of fighting or whatever. I had like I said, a great-great-great-granddad whose granddad of his own was in the Revolutionary War that lived up on 3 Mile. In fact, he's buried along the road up there. William C. Davis is his name. Well, I have a grand, on down the line on the Davis side, and he was in the Confederacy until I think it was November of 1863, and he walks away, comes home, and goes and joins the 13th Tennessee Cavalry. Now, why did he do that?
Because they were paying more.
The pension.
Right.
They wanted a pension, and they knew there would be a pension because everybody up here knew who was going to win the war. Okay, I mean it's pretty well,
Right.
So a lot of them would desert and join on the other side. Some of them, I'm sure, ideologically, but a lot of them did it just so they get a pension. Yeah, and that's what he did. Now the interesting story about him.
Yeah, Michael told us the story of a guy who deserted basically like 3 months before the war ended, just to go over to the other side to get the pension. I think that's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
but mine, he came home. And in order to hide him from the home guard who was out trying to find these guys, he would lay down the bed during the day and they'd make the bed up over him so that they couldn't find him. And he stayed that way for 3 months. In the daytime, they would make the bed up over him.
Sleeping all day, staying up all night.
Yeah, or whatever. And then, of course, he goes into Tennessee and joins the 13th Cavalry. Of course, that's quite a notorious outfit right there in terms of being rugged and rough and, battling whatever. But, yeah, you had that happen here.
So, David, before we leave this isolation era, I know there's some sensationalized things about the Bakersville riot and all that. Oh, this is the craziest part. But how crazy was it here? Like, was this an area that was full of outlaws? How much of it was moonshining? How much of it was illegal activity? How much it was trying to skirt the heavy hand of Big Brother government? Was it really? I guess what I'm at.
The wild.
Was it really the wild Western North Carolina that we've been told by some?
Yeah, to some extent. It is isolated, especially during the Civil War. Both sides had deserters that come to the mountains. And why do they come to the mountains?
It's just couldn't be found.
Couldn't be found. Yeah. And secondly, they would do raids out of the mountains to get stuff, not for one side or the other, but for themselves.
Sure.
In fact, those 4 guys I told you that came up here for Isaac that wrote in their book, they tell a story about how there were these raiding parties that would come from Roan Mountain and go down into the Tennessee side, and get whatever they wanted, livestock and food and whatever. They would just go and, kind of wrap it up and haul it home. But the point is they weren't doing it for the Confederacy or the Union.
Right.
And you had outlaws that would come up and hide up in here. Yeah. And you had the ones. A lot of the moonshining guys got started simply because they had no other way to get the products or the crops to market. So they would, take the corn and turn it into squeezins or whatever you want to call, because they could transport that and sell it. And initially, they allowed them to do that and pay a tax. But then, of course, later, that turns into a bigger problem, especially heading in to the early 1900s.
Right, the Prohibition.
Yeah. So yeah.
But people were moonshining around here a long time ago, right?
Yeah, but they were doing it again. I'm going to use the word legally, but you know what I'm saying. They were trying to come up with a way to do something where they could make some money
on what they had,
and that was the easiest way they could get the crop to market.
Not just raw corn, turn it into liquor.
Or apple or whatever. They could turn it into liquor. It was easier to transport than it was to take bushels and bushels of corn and stuff down these little trails.
Sure.
Right. Wow.
So that's a lot of where that came
So when did tobacco, obviously tobacco is a Native American thing or whatever, but when, we always forget now tobacco has basically been erased out of existence. One of the first things I ever got paid to do, I might be the last generation that got paid to hang tobacco in a backer barn.
Yeah.
Oh, I did it, but I didn't get paid to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I did. I had a roof over my head.
So two other things that we always, two other things that we always forget: tobacco and Christmas trees. When did that start becoming a thing around here?
The tobacco, of course,
was from forever.
Forever ago. Yeah. The Native Americans raised it, and of course, a different variety up here. It's is it burley? I think is the one that's up here, and then the bright leaf or whatever they call it's what they grow in the east.
Right.
So, it's a slightly different type of tobacco. But, yeah, that's been something that's been here a long, long time.
So there's evidence of that going on throughout all this.
Oh, yeah.
Basically.
I mean, that was just something. But I don't think it was raised as a cash crop more until later,
Yeah, you're talking about when industrialization started.
And tobacco
R.J.
use,
Reynolds, yeah.
And tobacco use, really ramps up.
Right.
That's when that gets started.
But this was something they grew for their own personal use or for community and whatever, something like that. Not necessarily cash crop, but just something they grew like normal.
But again, all of it's subsistence here.
Mm-hmm.
You have very, very little. I mean, that's why I was talking, like they raised corn, but they raised the majority of it to feed their livestock and to feed themselves. And then whatever they had left over, then they could do something with it, like making corn liquor with it or, or something along that line.
Gotcha.
They would do.
So in this transition, have you read Joanne Croom's book, her
I've
new
read
book?
pieces of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of my distant family members that wrote that, and that book, I'm probably about halfway through at this point, but it sort of tells the story of their family, in that transition from subsistence living to industrialization, and obviously the railroad plays a huge thing in that. I did see an article a couple weeks back about somebody was putting together the history of the small railroads here in this area.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Like, what were some of before you had the Clinchfield Railroad here? What were some of the smaller ones that were done around here? Were there ones like that around here?
No, they didn't really come in until you had the Clinchfield.
Really?
Here.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you might have had a little bit.
What about like an extension of them or whatever? Because you see some of these, out and about here.
Yeah, they're called dinky lines.
Dinky lines.
Called.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but they were tied back into the
main.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of going to get at. And this is talking a little bit about what blows up into the race right in Spruce Pine.
Okay.
Is what happens. And what have I already been talking about all along? We are isolated. It's hard to get into here. But in the late 1890s, early 1900s, there is a push to get a railroad from the coal fields of Kentucky to the textile mills of South Carolina. Okay? Why is that a big deal? They need the coal at the textile mills to run things.
Right.
So there is all sorts of efforts to find a way across the Appalachians. And there's several fits and starts of this. And in fact, it gets all the way to Johnson City in the late 1880s. But then there's the Panic of 1893, wipes out the company that's doing it. And a fellow by the name of George Carter, he buys up.
So that was a financial crisis. The Panic of 1893
was a financial crisis.
Okay.
And it took out a lot of things, just simply because, the capital that they needed to build this railroad went away.
Gotcha.
So Carter found a way to raise money and also to push on. And he makes the decision he's going to take the railroad from Johnson City and get it down the mountain. And there's 2 or 3 different ways they look at doing it. And there's actually a Facebook group about the Clinchfield that talks about the different ways they looked at the routes and why they made the decisions that they did. I've always wondered, they followed the tow. They could have followed it on the Yancey side, but they stayed on the Mitchell side most of the way, which is, to me, is kind of interesting. But the point is they figure out their route, and Carter comes up with the money to get it done. And by 1902, the railroad gets to Huntdale, North Carolina, which there's all sorts of interesting stories how Huntdale got its name.
Really?
You know what that is?
Yeah, I think I've heard some of them, but remind us.
Yeah, so the fellow that ran the store down there had a wife named Dale, and she'd run off all the time, so he had to go hunt Dale. That's how it got the name.
Really?
That's how it come about, yeah.
Nice.
But anyway, so he gets there, and they built all sorts of warehouses and things in Huntdale, and it's a booming place because it's the end of the line. And then, of course, they're pushing on, and 4 years later, Huntdale is what it is today.
Right.
It goes away.
Yeah.
So it moves on. It gets to, Boonford, into Penland. And finally, in 1904, it gets to what is now Spruce Pine. Now, the interesting part is if you've never been to the Archives of Appalachia at East Tennessee State, I would encourage anybody to go because they have a whole Clinchfield section. And my wife and I, we've been over there. They have a map of the entire railroad drawn to scale that you can spread out. It is amazing.
Wow.
It shows the pieces. It shows the names of the people who own the land that they're buying from. And it shows different things, including they mark on there where spruce pine is going to be, which I'll get to here in a second. But the point is, it gets to here in 1904, and they had made the decision before then to head down the mountain at Alta Pass. Now, a couple of reasons why, but the main reason is they figured out a route where they could loop the railroad back and forth to go down the mountain, and it goes 16 miles to go down the mountain, 1 mile. Or,
16 miles covers 1 mile down.
It's about 1,000 feet, roughly.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the decision is made. That's how they're going to get down the mountain. Now they get to Spruce Pine in 1904. They bought up all this land, and 3 guys, Dr. Charles Peterson, Tom Cox, and of course I'll forget the third one's name. I always use a Blaylock. They get together and they turn around and buy back from the railroad the land that Spruce Pine sits on today. The railroad paid $2,000 for it at that time, which was about $100,000 in today's money.
Yeah.
Dr. Charles and Thomas Cox and the Blaylock, when they buy back, they pay $17,000, which is nearly $750,000-$800,000 for the same amount of land. That they, so the railroad made some bucks there.
Right.
Yeah.
But they buy back the land, and they're going to then turn it into a town. Okay, that's whatever. Because the railroad stopped here, they built a depot here. And we've got pictures of that early depot, in 1902, 1903, 1904, in that era. But then the push is to get it on down the mountain, which they do complete in 1909. But to get to that point, they have to have engineers, and I'm not talking about railroad engineers. I'm talking about an actual engineer to design this.
Right.
They can't find anybody to do it. So they go to Rutgers University. And there's some guys who are graduating from the engineering school, literally graduating from the school, and they talk these guys into coming here to try to lay out the railroad.
Wow.
So they make the commitment to do that. And George Carter makes the financial commitment to do this too, because it costs $1 million a mile in 1900 to make this happen. Think about that.
$1 million
in their time. Yes, they're paying that to get. That's how valuable this railroad is to them to get it done.
That's an unfathomable amount of money.
God,
So anyways-
back then, what's that inflation
Oh
adjusted?
yeah, we're talking billions of dollars.
$1 billion a mile.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
my
Jeez.
God.
but the point being, these dudes from Rutgers tackle this when nobody else will touch it. They over-engineer it to such a level that it's never been modified. Even to this day, the trains that use it today are still using the cuts those guys put in over 120 years ago.
Really?
Yes. Think about
That's
that.
amazing. That's astonishing.
Wow.
But they find a way to get it down the mountain, and they get it onto Spartanburg, and of course it turns into the clinch field as we know it. Now, what does that do for us? Well, it opens the region up, number one, but not to the level that we need it open, but it opens it some, okay? But it also is the precursor to coming up with a way to move goods in and out of here. And that blows up 20 years later, when there is discoveries of massive feldspar deposits and mica deposits, and all this capital comes flowing in here to start that process of getting that out and getting it to market.
Wow.
And the railroad gives us a way to get it in and out of here.
So the railroad just really changed it.
Everything. That's your first big change. And we'll hit the second big change here in a moment. And that's why I said this ties back into what we were discussing about with the race ride. Because the second big thing that happens around 1920 is there's a push in North Carolina, because the automobile has begun its rise. They start working on it in the late 1800s. Well, by the early 1900s, you start having cars all over the place. And they have to come up with roads for them to run on, because they don't run real good on footpaths.
Right.
So, especially down east, that's no problem. But up here, it is very difficult to build a road, especially a road that would work for a car. I mean, even if you build a dirt road here, you're still going to be dealing with rain and snow and mud and all sorts of problems. But the commitment is made by the state of North Carolina with what's called the Good Roads Act. And this is during Cameron Morrison's time as governor. And they set aside $50 million in 1920, which is almost $1 billion in today's money, which is, when you think about what they get done with it, they built 5,500 miles of roads that are what are called improved roads. They're paved, concreted roads, and they are originally to connect the county seats of all the counties in North Carolina. Okay? That was the original plan. So that commitment
Boy,
is
the roads
made.
were a lot cheaper than the railroad.
Yeah, well.
Damn.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But we'll get into how that's done here in a moment.
Right.
But the point is, the decision is made to do that. Well, they get this done, guys, in like 7 years. I mean, it's amazing how rapidly this happens. And it just happens that they're trying to get a road from Marion up the mountain so it can go to Burnsville, so it can go to, at that time, Newland was not a county seat, or it had just become a county seat, and then on to Bakersfield. Well, what's sitting right there in the middle? Spruce pine. Right there where it, where it could be. So there are these roads that are built here, and the decision is made to obviously route them the easiest way to route them. Well, what would that be? Those footpaths that they've followed for hundreds of years. To some extent.
some degree, yeah.
I mean, obviously, they don't follow exactly,
Right.
but to a great extent they do. So that's how you get US 19E, which at that time was called North Carolina Highway 69. It later becomes a U.S. highway and is turned into 19. And then they split it at Cane River.
Yeah.
At that time, that was the Asheville to Bristol Highway. That is now 19W. It was called the Asheville to Bristol Highway. And then the other part came around and went to Elizabethton. Okay. 226 followed the old Revolutionary War route from Spruce Pine to Bakersville and to the top of Iron Mountain. That's how you get the roads. But more importantly, what did I say about them? They're improved roads, which means they're paved.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What does that do? That opens this area like it had never been opened before to transportation. Now, even today, we would look at it as primitive, but think about it in terms of you're living in an area that for basically 200 years, it's been nigh on impossible to get into.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you've got a railroad that can get you anywhere in the United States that you want to go. Because up until 1952, you could hop a train and go anywhere in the United States from Spruce Pine.
Yeah.
Think about that. Okay? And we've got records of people who did that. S.T. Henry, who ran the Tri-County News for years, he worked for a book publishing company in Washington, D.C., but he lived in Spruce Pine because, heck, he could hop here and go to New York or Chicago or wherever he wanted to go. He just go down to the train station, get on the train, and go.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But then...
I want to do that now.
Yeah.
I do too.
Dang, I'd take rail.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a scenic trip. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're taking the long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, you've got all of this all of a sudden opened. And what happens now? Think about this. You've lived here all your life, and all you have ever known is you raise your crops, you raise your livestock, and you want to be left alone. But now we have these companies coming in here, and they're wanting to dig the side of the mountain out and haul out feldspar and haul out mica and whatever. And they want you to come and work for them where they will pay you a wage instead of you working on a farm.
You just go buy whatever you need. It's almost like it went from a settlement to a town overnight.
It went in less than 10 years.
That's what that book by Joanne really kind of starts to hit home. Is how rapid of a change it was here.
All right. That comes back to the race right part of this.
Okay. Right.
Because, and this has to do with some of whatever. And obviously we can go way deep into this. And we're working on our presentation that we gave. We're going to have it on the Historical Society
so don't
site.
give it away. We'll link to that when you guys get it up under this pod as well. So I don't want you to give away the entire story. But give us a brief overview.
Yeah, I do want to explain to folks, though, racism is involved here. But there's a couple of parts about that you have to think about. Coming back to the isolation, okay? Even when they were building the railroad, they had to bring in workers to help build the railroad, all right? That didn't sit well with the local folks because they were different than them. Even though they had white skin, they were Italian. They were Irish.
Right.
They were Eastern European. They were not from around here, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
And
You
that
ain't
didn't-
from around here.
that didn't sit well with them. Well, the same thing happens in the early 1920s. There is this huge demand. They want men to come to work in these mines. And some of them do, but a lot of them don't want any part of it because that's not their life. They've never lived that life where they worked for a wage. They worked, they raised their crop, they lived at the house, their house. They didn't want any interference. And now all of a sudden you have these weird people from Chicago and Boston and New York coming in here, these bigwigs, with the money. And there's a huge amount of money that comes into Spruce Pine. And enough money for them to put a water and sewer system into the town, which was the envy of all these communities around them because they didn't have it. But Spruce Pine had raised a $75,000 bond because there was enough money coming in from the mining to build this. You have the Good Roads project that I'm talking about that's building these nice roads from Marion and to Newland and to Bakersville and to Burnsville and to Asheville. All of a sudden, you could get from Spruce Pine to Asheville what used to take 4 and 5 hours on the train in an hour, hour and a half. Okay? All of a sudden, you can do this. Now, these roads, to a great extent, are built by prison labor. Now, again,
That's what Michael was describing to us, which, by the way, he was in the chat, so he said evening to everybody.
Hello there, Michael. But that's the point here is that's how they got this done, guys. We talked about $50 million and then they built 5,500 miles of roads.
It's prisoners.
They did it on the back of these African-American prisoners.
Wow.
And, without going much into it, but let's just cut right straight to it. A lot of them got thrown into jail. And it's almost a legalized form of slavery.
Sure.
So they're put into jail. They're put there on a, some sort of a sentence that they then serve in hard labor where they're working on road gangs and doing this stuff.
That's a really hard concept for people to understand. I think, you see that, and I've seen this even bantered about online about our area. We talk about, we touched just very briefly with Michael about the sundown laws and things like this that supposedly don't actually exist. But the people talk about this being a racist area. But I mean, that really drives home, where we've come. You had 200 years of complete isolation. Then all of a sudden, virtually overnight, you're being you're invaded.
Now let's back up. Now there are before that, 20 years before that, where you do have racial incidents. And in fact, we talked about several of these in our program, and they'll be in our presentation. Sure. But the point being is, there is a lot of racism that flies around out there. Okay,
were there any African American families that settled here?
Not initially.
Not initially.
No. Now of course, you had some slaves that lived here, but very few of them were free men that lived here. But there were a few here, there, and yonder. Okay,
so there were free black men living in this area.
Very few. Yes. But like in this case, you had a shanty town down on Hawkins Branch in Spruce Pine where there was a group that moved here to work in the mine. And yes, they had families there. Some of them were a little rowdy and whatever, but there were families there. There were kids there and wives there and whatever. But they moved here because of the money that they were going to make in the mines. And in the mines, conversely, were telling all these people, we've hired all we can hire locally, excuse me, and we're having to bring these people in to work. And, there's maybe some too that, they paid them less. But at the same time, I've got some sources where they cited that they actually paid them pretty decent money for that time period, and that sort of whatever. But again, this flies in the face of 200 years of tradition here and of self-sufficiency and of, just leave me alone.
Well, I guess there was probably part of it where people looked at that and was like, why the hell are they building the railroad? We've always done this ourselves. Why don't they employ us to do it?
Some of it, but they also, some just didn't want African Americans in here working on it at all, and they made that clear 3 and 4 times. In fact, something similar to what happens in Spruce Pine in September 1923 happened a year before at Tokane The same thing where they put them on the train and sent them out of the county, but nobody knows about that one.
That's interesting.
But it happened here. And
that was before the railroad even made it to Spruce Pine.
Well, no, the railroad was here at this time. They were working on regular road projects.
Oh, okay, I got you. We're talking about road.
Yeah. But now they brought prisoners in the 1890s to work on the railroad. Mm-hmm. In fact, at one point, half the prison population in North Carolina was here working on putting that railroad down the mountain. A lot of people didn't know that. Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, there's
undoubtedly a lot of those men were probably in prison for ridiculous things.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So again, this is a little beyond, but my point being is there's a lot more to the story than people know.
Right.
And there's an economic element here. And coming back to that, you're used to being here. You're used to riding your horse on a footpath. And all of a sudden, you've got a paved highway. Well, I'll illustrate this. When they were building the road, this happened around the time of the riot. Mm-hmm. They were working on the road between Spruce Pine and Ledger, and a car came through there and ran over a little boy and killed him, and went on to Bakersville. Well, the next day, the community formed up a group and went and rounded up the road crew and said, "You're not going to finish this road. We don't want this thing here." And it had nothing to do with the color of their skin.
Right.
But they had wanted no part of that road being built from Spruce Pine to Bakersville.
It killed a kid.
Because it killed a kid. We don't want anything like that in our community. And that happened, actually, in September 1920.
So there was a fierce spirit to guard and protect the community.
Yeah. But sociologically, I mean, it's a big fancy word there.
Right.
But everything they had known has upended, literally starting around 1900 to 1923. And like I was talking a little bit earlier, we were talking about Spruce Pine quadrupled in size in 10 years. But Spruce Pine went from, and I've got a picture of it in this week's Mitchell News Journal, if you've not seen it, or on WTOE's website, you can go and read the story. We have a picture of Spruce Pine from 1923. Well, if you saw that picture, you'd think Spruce Pine was a Wild West town.
Yeah.
It does. It looks like it.
It looks like a Wild West town. It does not look like what we know. 3 years after that picture was made, the streets in Spruce Pine were paved. They had modern water and sewer. They had a contract to run regular electricity. At that time, they were getting electricity from a dam in the Toe River down at Minpro, which they took out of the river not too long ago. But that was put in by the Harris Mining Company, and it was done to run
the mine
in their mine.
Yeah.
And then whenever they didn't need it, they would switch it over and let Spruce Pine use it. Well, it got where they wanted something a little more dependable. Well, they made a deal. At the time, they signed a 60-year lease with Carolina Power and Light to construct lines here. And guess when that lease expired? 1986.
Really?
Think about that. That comes into our area a little bit.
That's crazy.
But the point
people
is,
don't understand how the river was used, all the streams and stuff, like even Crabtree.
Right.
There's a gentleman that lives at the bend where if you go up Crabtree from down there where Young's Mountain Music used to be, right on the Yancey border. You go up that way. At one point, it takes a sharp turn to the left and starts to go uphill right there. If you go back in there, there's a couple from Florida that owns that property now. That where those two lakes are, there's two ponds, two pretty big ponds on the right that you pass. That was the site of the old Crabtree mining village.
And that is the Crabtree Falls, not the one on the park.
Exactly. That's what everybody thinks. That is the Crabtree Falls. But the couple that owns that, they still actually they used some of the same infrastructure that the mining town used there to run their own hydroelectric power plant that then they sell back to Duke Energy. I had no clue until I went in there and did some work for these people.
For them.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And he was even showing me like how they literally used the same it's the same infrastructure that they built all that time ago to redirect this water into and all he's done is modernize the plant, basically.
Right.
The turbines and things like that. But it's wild.
It's crazy.
Crazy. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, 1923 when the riot happens, 1927 you have regular electricity in Spruce Pine, dependable water and sewer. You have telephone, you have telegraph. They had one telegraph line here in 1923 that the railroad had here. And you had all these people up here trying to cover the race right, and they're trying to use this one telegraph line to get their stories back to their papers. Excuse me. And, 4 years later, Spruce Pine, it turns into a modern city. 4 years. In 4 years.
That's crazy.
So
was that was well before like Burnsville or Newland or anything like that?
They're there.
Right.
But they don't have, number one, the crossroads that Spruce Pine has. And number two, Spruce Pine at that time, now you're getting some in Yancey County. In fact, at this time, Yancey and Mitchell County are sending out 65% of all the feldspar and mica used in the entire United States came from these two counties.
Really?
At that time. But the point is, they were not at the epicenter of that. They didn't have the railroad to ship.
Right.
They didn't have a lot of the infrastructure that Spruce Pine had, and that's why Spruce Pine blew up.
Gotcha.
It happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Right time.
But they did it all literally in 10 years.
So you mentioned, it quadrupled in size. What was largely was it industry obviously industry bringing people here
Yes.
or whatever. So how did that, what are the families, the prominent families that moved in here at that time versus the families that had been here for a long time?
I mentioned the S.T. Henry family, for example. He moves here in the early 1900s. He and his wife got married. They came here on their honeymoon. They thought it was just this wonderful place to live, and they bought a farm out on Dale Road, and then he does all sorts of stuff up in here, So they move in here. You have the Dent family, Raymond Dent. They come here with the mica.
Were the Harrises originally from here?
No, C.J. Harris is not from here.
Okay.
He actually had mining interests in Dillsboro and Silva and Spruce Pine. I don't know where he's originally from, but he was living in Asheville when he passed away.
Okay. What about like Reagan's and all that?
Brad Reagan, no, he is from Georgia. And he was a tire salesman for Goodyear. And he came through and he was selling tires to a store on Upper Street, which is where right next to where Lance Jewelry used to be. It's now a showroom for L&L.
Yeah.
Right there. It used to be the old mail and cloth shop that was there.
Yes, yeah.
All right, but that was the original. It was a tire store. And they had a Dodge car dealership. And Brad came through, and the guys that owned it said, hey, look, we'll sell you this. And he got $3,000 from his granddad and bought it and turned it into Carolina Tire, which, was an amazing thing at its height.
Oh, yeah.
It was contributing $250 million, and this is in the late 70s, to our economy. Just that one business in Mitchell County. Not to mention Mitchell Distributing, which was doing the mining stuff, that was founded here. So, there was all sorts of industry that came in, and like you mentioned, there are people who come with the industry, to run it, to operate it, to whatever.
And not only industry, but government. What about the mica house and all that?
Yeah, well, Sam Phillips is the one that really got that going. He got him to declare that a.
Are the Phillipses originally from here?
Yes,
they are.
Yeah,
so that's a name. Okay,
yeah,
I got you.
But so you had the mica house, like you mentioned, that he gets done. I had another one I was just going to talk about there. Shoot, and I've lost it. But the point is, you had demand for these products, and they could only be found here. Okay?
Gotcha.
Now, another interesting thing that comes out of this, 10 years after the riot, 1933, somewhere in there, 34. You have some folks from Corning Glass that show up at the Chestnut Flat Mine, which is out at Ledger. If you don't know where that's at, where Dick's Carpet is at, on the side of the road, just past it, there used to be a road that turned to the right there. It's blocked off now. That goes up to an old mine on the mountain. It's called Chestnut Flat. In 1934, these guys from Corning Glass show up, and they say, we've been given this project to build the world's largest mirror. At that time, it was a 200-inch mirror that they were constructing for a telescope. And they knew that there were deposits of quartz here, and they wanted to use the quartz because of how it dealt with heating and cooling. So the decision was made they would come here because they knew the purest quartz, and this has nothing to do with their computer chips. It has everything to do with it, how they made the mirror. They came here, and the guys at the mine just kind of laughed at them because What was that to them? The quartz.
They were throwing it away.
They were throwing it away. It was waste.
Yeah, have at it.
Yeah,
yeah.
Like, knock yourself out.
Right.
So there's this dump, and these guys go and they pick out a trainload of that material, and they send it to New York, and they pour a 200-inch mirror that later becomes the world's largest telescope on Palomar Mountain in California. And it was that from 1949 to 1992.
Wow.
Golly.
At one time, half of the 10 largest telescopes in the United States, well, actually the world, I should say, were Mitchell County quartz.
Is that the first use of quartz?
Yes, to an industrial scale.
Right.
Yes.
So now you're talking one of the world's number one most useful minerals right now, basically an essential mineral, was a waste product up until 1940?
1930.
Yeah.
1930, in the 1930s.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Just like feldspar
That's
was.
crazy.
Yeah.
Feldspar was a waste product for the mica.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and then of course now come on down the 1980s, and they're developing silicon chips for computers, and they have to come up with a way to keep them pure. They have to stay pure silicon, and so the discussion is how can we make what's called a crucible, or a way to form these chips so that they don't get messed up with some stuff they don't need in them.
Right.
And that's the ultra pure quartz, because they found quartz here that is the purest in the world, and it's only in Mitchell, Avery, and Yancey counties.
I remember we asked Alex for what's the chances you find, and he's like 0. We looked without even without even the question. He's like 0. We've looked.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've looked.
Yeah.
Now you've got the quartz. It's funny how everything comes full circle. Now you've got the quartz, and the byproducts or the waste from the quartz is the mica and the feldspar.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the mica now, I like to tell this, is Spruce Pine Mica here, they import their mica from India. They don't mine it locally.
Yeah, I know.
Because they get it cheaper to
Get it so
ship
much
it from
cheaper.
India than they can dig it out of the ground here.
Yep.
Now I guess U.S. Gypsum has started to use mica in their. It's like a bonding agent in their.
Yeah, they buy it from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, they buy mica from us. I believe they do.
But again, coming back to that, at that time, the railroad is what made the difference there and made them able to open this area so that they could get that out of here as the demand increased for it. And again, we've kept inventing ways to use this stuff. And, I think Alex went into that on his program.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously a lot deeper than I ever could.
Right.
But the point being is that isolation went away. Now, what's really interesting to me, if we want to take this up to the modern day, is what happened here about 5 years ago.
Oh, man.
We got a 4-lane from Asheville to Spruce Pine.
Yeah.
The road.
And won't be long. I say won't be long. They were talking about this in the 1960s, but the idea is it's supposed to go to the top of 3 Mile and run into 221 up there. But the point is, this is the most open this region has ever been to surface transportation.
Yeah.
What's going to happen here now in 20 years?
Right.
With this new road that exists that has never existed like it is now before. Yeah.
Hopefully a lot of growth.
Yeah. But it's going to be interesting to see how that, I'll call it a dichotomy here, big fancy word.
Right.
The locals, who again are, even to this day, let's face it, guys, we have traditions and we have ways we want to be, and you have people from off, as my wife refers to herself from time to time, because they're not from here, and people look at them a little bit, that more and more is going to become an issue. Yeah. Because now it's easier and easier to get in here.
Yeah.
And with the internet, you don't have to be in Chicago to do some of this work.
No.
You don't have to be in wherever. So
what's so interesting
what's going to be
now
interesting,
is
what will happen, since this road is here and since we have the internet now.
Well, and you speak about internet. I mean, virtually none of the things that we have now would be possible without the quartz that come out of those mines.
No.
So I mean, if you really look at it in some sort of abstract way, we're responsible for that even.
I mean, a lot of people don't think about that, but yeah, every human being on the earth that has an electronic device most likely carries a piece of spruce pine with them. Everybody. Not just a third of them or even half of them. Everybody that has a phone, a computer, any sort of electronic something, it has its origin.
Even light bulbs.
Yeah. Halogen light bulbs. They get their start here. But again, the point being, this little isolated valley
Yeah.
You know, the Toe River Valley had been isolated all these years, you know, and then it has the mineral riches it does. But the point being is up until really the early 1900s, you couldn't get in and out of here. You couldn't.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to do anything with it.
David, how unique is that?
It's very unique. I mean, in terms of what we have here, I mean, the closest you could come to that would be coal, you know, in West Virginia. But even that, there are only so many uses for coal. They keep finding uses for our
Right,
stuff,
right.
you know, as I'm sure you both can.
I guess the other thing I was asking is how unique is that type of history to have? I mean, how blessed are we to have this type of rich history around here?
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of folks realize part of that, especially, you know, that even the founding of our country, you could even make the argument that without Kings Mountain, then the U.S. might not have existed.
What was the turning point of the
It
Revolutionary
was
War?
very much. I mean, even, you know, Thomas Jefferson even said that it was very much a turning point of the war.
Yeah.
That, you know, up until then it was going bad for the
Right.
for the revolutionary, you know, for the patriot cause. And you had a bunch of ticked off mountaineers that went down there and said, you know, we're not going
Opened
to
up
put
a
up
can
with
of
your
whoop
bull.
ass on
Yeah, that's pretty much what they did.
Yep.
You know, I mean, and they got it done in 20 minutes. I mean, they were done with the old boy in 20 minutes when they got down there.
Dang.
You know, I mean, you just have to.
God
think
dang.
and we're
Kick
talking
some ass down there.
You know, and we're talking about we're bringing people for that. You know, yeah, they're not native from here, but they are kind of native here. They lived here,
Right.
You know, 20 years, and they knew, you know, what they wanted, and they didn't want to be messed with. And that's why, you know, when he made his threat of laying waste to their land with fire and sword, you just don't say that to them. And we have that even to this day, I think, to some extent. You know?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, you know, a lot of people don't realize, you know, the richness, even all the way back into the Native American stuff and what they're uncovering now, like we talked about there, you know, the fact that they were mining here thousands of years before we even thought about it.
And just the fact that there's more to the story.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more to the story.
So that brings me to the question. Has this been a lifelong passion of yours, David?
Well, so first off, I'm not a professional at all. Okay. In fact, my college degree isn't even in history. I took history courses. I love it, and I enjoy it, and it's a passion of mine, but it's not a professional avocation.
Well,
I
you
didn't go
could
to
have
school
fooled
for that.
me.
I
You
would
could have fooled
disagree.
me.
I would say that you're a professional.
Yeah.
Well, I've worked at it, you know. I mean, you know, Chris and I, this really took off when Chris Hollifield and I worked on the Spruce Pine book in 2008. It was kind of funny because at that time there was a company called Arcadia Publishing. You've seen the book.
I was getting ready to ask you, did they reach out to you guys to do that?
No. So this company, they had a deal where you would propose to them a book. And more importantly, you would tell them where they could sell the book. I mean, honestly, that's what it cut down to is where can we sell this book? Where can we make money? And so we proposed doing a book. And honestly, when we started, the two of us talked, and we thought, wow, we'll be flying if we get 200 pictures because we could do about 120 pictures in the book. And so we started reaching out to folks. And by the time the book came around, we had 5,000 pictures for Spruce Pine.
Jeez.
That, you know, I would have never dreamt of what we would have gotten, you know, and just all an outpouring of stuff from that. So that's I guess kind of how it got started. And then I would say we got roped in, but Arcadia contacted us. We were finishing the Spruce Pine book, and they had been in talks with some folks at Little Switzerland because it was the 100th anniversary of Little Switzerland, and they were looking for somebody to do that book. And Chris and I decided we'd take it on. And at the same time, I told him, I said, you know, we really ought to do something extra here. So we actually made a video where we interviewed a lot of people who, thank goodness, we talked to because they're no longer with us. And we got down the story of the community. And we got to tell that in that book. And that really, you know, kind of got a lot of this started. And it's something I find incredibly interesting, and then run into things like I told you the story about the 4 soldiers, you know, the 4 Union soldiers and Isaac English. We knew that it had happened, but we didn't know the backstory.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like the race riot. We knew it happened, and there's a lot of tales that have been spread over the years. And, my thing was I knew we had the 100th anniversary coming up, and we'd talked at the Historical Society. We wanted to at least mention it to people. I said, I want to do a program about it. And we actually started working on it about 2 years ago. So long before it came about. But then the stuff we found, it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Again, of a story, who would have realized really the massive change that was taking place. It was really in the entire county, but really focused on Spruce Pine.
Well, history seems to be one of those things that when you start peeling back the layers, it's like an onion. You're peeling back layers, and you find the little stories, and you find the interesting side notes into it. It's like putting together a puzzle almost, kind of.
A lot, yeah. Yeah,
it really is.
And then uncovering things that either you didn't, like we didn't know about the Tokane incident. We found one where they brought this African American band that come from Asheville into the Bakersville area. This would have been 1880, 1890, somewhere in there. They'd come up here to, at this time, a guy running for Congress had hired them to come up here and entertain people and kind of get his name out. And they show up, and basically they're run out. They're told, you're not allowed in here.
Wow.
We didn't know at all about any of this. And that's, those sorts of stories came uncovered as we were working on the race
That's a
ride.
whole other thing, too. We could go into the music and
Oh, yeah.
Whole other thing.
I mean, I don't think a lot of the folks here realize the richness of their heritage.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's good and bad there.
Yeah.
And you have to take the good and the bad together.
You do.
You have to understand, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's history.
It is history, and it can't be changed.
Yep.
And it's going back to what you were saying earlier about, kind of the idea of it being an onion. So how many times have you started to peel the onion back, the different layers, and you find out it's not an onion at all, it's an apple? How much of history has been at least embellished, if not patently just false?
You have some of that, but you also have history, and I mean, everybody, and probably will be guilty of it too to some extent. It's told from somebody's viewpoint.
Sure.
Even if you try to be as unbiased as you can,
right,
you're still going to have some in there because, like me, I'm proud of native of here.
Sure.
But, it pained me to tell some of the things that we told in the race riot because I'm from here, and it's an embarrassing thing to do.
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm sure, I will have some that will think I didn't go far enough, and others that will think I went too far.
Yeah.
But you're going to deal with that with history.
Sure.
Well, and it's one of those things, too. Like, again, this is the reason, this would be my argument why you don't tear down statues. You don't erase history. You learn from history.
Sure.
You respect history for what it is. It's not something that you can change. But if you don't learn those lessons, then I would argue you're doomed to repeat them.
Yep.
Right?
I would think so.
Again, I'm hopeful, if nothing else, by what we did recently with this, is that we've made people aware of that past, and where the community was, and hopefully some of why it was. That doesn't explain a lot of the situation today. Obviously, the one thing that, coming back to that coal piece that I mentioned, we've been able to hang on there because ours are so versatile versus, a coal whatever.
Sure.
But at the same time, that train's going to leave someday.
Yeah.
I think Alex may have told y'all. If he didn't, I talked to him. I said, all right, so when does this end? And he said, well,
silicone chips.
If we are prudently, we're very prudent with how we treat our resource, we got 70 years. And then after that, that's gone. So where does it go next? We've been lucky for 150 years. We've had something that was replaced by something else. Is that going to continue, or is that gone? When mining finally does peter out, that's a question. So
I think it's a question of where the world goes too nowadays.
Yeah.
Where does Spruce Pine find its niche and find its way in that world?
Right. Yeah. And I hope people will look at the past and learn from it, either what they did well or what they really screwed up. With some of this. I mean, coming back to like the race riot, for example, I mean, you had a lot of fallout from that. Obviously, the poor man who lost his life, for a conviction of something that may or may not have happened. Honestly, we don't know whether or not she was assaulted. We don't know.
Right.
But you had a mayor that was a one-term mayor. He lost his job. You had a chief of police in Spruce Pine, lost his job 2 years after it happened. You had all these people whose lives were affected by these events. It's the same thing now. Our lives are affected by previous events, and we've got to learn from what happened, good and bad, with them, and take that and make our way forward.
Man, I couldn't have said it better, David.
All of us, and I'm talking about all of us working together. We got to do that together. People who've lived here for generations and the folks who move here.
Yeah.
We all got to work together and make this happen.
Amen, brother. Listen, David, tell people out there where they can find you, where they can find the Mitchell County Historical Society, and if you've got anything coming up that we need to know about.
No, okay. Well, MitchellNCHistory.org is the Historical Society. You can get me there if you just go and hit, contact, get a hold of me there. Some things we got coming. I am working on a revised and expanded version of our presentation on the race riot that we did down at the Riverside Park back on September 5th. It is, I will tell folks the way we're going to do it. It is much longer, much more detailed than the one we did. And the one we did was still almost 2 hours long.
Oh, wow.
But what we're going to do is we're going to cut it into pieces.
Okay.
So when you go find it, and it will be on the YouTube channel, just search for Mitchell NC History on YouTube. But when you go there, we're going to have it in what I call a playlist form. So you can pick and choose what you watch. If you want to watch the whole thing in order, you can.
Right.
But let's say, you want to watch the biographies where we tell about the players. Right. Mm-hmm. You can watch that one section or whatever. That's how it will be set up. So it's not going to be where you have to suffer through, so to speak, a multi-hour presentation to maybe get one little nugget out of it.
Sure.
But so we'll have that there. So that's the big thing I'm working on right now, is trying to get that finished. It has been more than I had planned on it being. In terms, that's why I told, again, my wife, I've told her, I said, I want this thing to end sometime. And it's not because I don't enjoy it, but it just seems like it has had a life of its own, really, for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I want to do some different things.
Absolutely.
There's some other things I'd like to move on and do.
Yeah, a couple years is a long time to work on something like that.
But that's the two easiest ways probably to get a hold of me is MitchellNCHistory.org and hit contact. The email there is just MitchellNCHistory@gmail.com. That's probably the easiest way.
Okay.
I mean, I have one, Biddix@mac.com. You can write me there.
Okay.
Or reach out. You can find me. I work for Mitchell County government Tuesday through Friday in Bakersville.
Okay.
I do some stuff for the county government. And then occasionally you'll hear me on the radio. Every once in a while I'll pop up on WTOE and WKYK. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Upcoming radio personality. Yeah. There you go.
There you go. I
know you don't want that label, but I'm giving it to you anyway, David.
Well, it's funny because I did that. That's what I went to college for.
Yeah.
Was to do radio,
broadcasting,
television broadcasting.
Nice. Wow.
And I actually did it from, if you count high school, 1980 to 1993, so 13 years.
Wow.
But then decided I wanted something a little more stable, and I went into working in community colleges then for 30 years.
So if somebody was to have, let's say that somebody was to have something that they would like to give to the Historical Society to be preserved. Mm-hmm. I know you guys have a museum.
We do. We have the McBee Museum in Bakersville. And, we welcome all contributions.
So anything, including things from the modern era?
Yes. Yeah, to some extent. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have something I want to give to you, David, and I didn't. I failed to bring it tonight, and that's my apologies, but I intended to. But I have got the original paper banner that hung for the Spruce Pine Bucks.
Really?
Yes, hockey team.
Yep.
I rescued it, probably illegally. But I think the statute of limitation has passed, hopefully, from the Pine Bridge Coliseum down there. I grew up in that hotel.
Yep, you did.
I did. I absolutely did. And I spent almost every day of my life in that Coliseum. But I rescued that, and I want to give it to you guys. I regret that I failed to bring it today. I was in a hurry and just completely ran out the door and forgot it. But I want to give that to you guys because I think that's something important that needs to be preserved. Smallest town in America to ever host professional hockey.
Exactly. And
Spruce Pine, North
I
Carolina.
actually did a podcast for that back in the summer. There's a fellow who has done a podcast on the Pine Bridge Bucks.
Really?
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
I haven't listened to the final version of it because they told me when it was released they would let me have it. But they actually came and interviewed me and several other people about it.
Wow.
I have a shirt.
Yeah.
An actual long sleeve T-shirt. I have a pennant.
Nice.
I have one of their books. So I actually went to a couple of their games.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean that's a totally interesting story, and people just cannot believe that we actually had a professional hockey team
I know. It's crazy.
in the South, in the mountains.
Yeah. That's a
Everywhere it
wholly
would be.
unique thing.
Yeah.
Yet again, one of those things that makes Spruce Pine a very interesting place to be from. So.
Yeah, and you also had the goalie at the 1980 Olympics,
The Miracle
team,
on
the
Ice.
Miracle on Ice.
Yeah.
He played here.
Wow.
He actually played for the Bucks for a little
That's
while.
crazy, isn't it?
So, yeah.
That's wild. That's wild. Well, David, thank you so much for doing this,
Yeah.
man. This is honestly
Didn't know. I guess I should ask. Do we have anybody that had questions that they wanted to pop?
not tonight. No, I think everybody was just enthralled with listening to you talk. But no, I know we've been trying to put this together for a long time, and I can't thank you enough, David. I love this type of stuff. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, we all.
We'll pick
another topic.
Yeah, we'll pick another topic and go over it and something in depth for sure.
Yeah, but
You're a very interesting guy, David.
I love
Thank you.
well, thank you all for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I got a couple housekeeping things I want to do. I've been asked by a couple people to reach out. You know, we've got the.
Yeah, I've got it pulled up here too.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Go for it then.
Oh yeah, those are the treasures in the fall.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So Saturday, October 14th, 10 to 5, downtown Spruce Pine. There's going to be the Treasures in the Fall Festival. So there's going to be music in the park. You've got the Redeemed Quartet, Tow River Bandits, Sleepy Jones Express. Excuse me. There's going to be presentations. There's going to be food, raffles, games. There's going to be all kinds of stuff just for kids. There's going to be a ton of shops and everything that you can think of down there to buy. So, please check that out. Again, that's going to be Saturday, October 14th from 10 to 5 downtown Spruce Pine.
And that's something a little new that we've not
Yes.
done before. So
Yes.
this is something we really want to drop to some people to get out to support. You've also got the Bluegrass and Bluegrass Festival going on this weekend.
Yep.
Which is something that goes on annually here. Get out and support that. And then, of course, we've got Halloween coming up at the end of the month, which we'll go over that more later. But you guys doing anything for the Halloween? I'm
no.
sure you are.
Well, we probably are, but you're leaving out one that I wanted to mention.
Okay, go for it.
October 20th and 21st in Bakersville.
Yes.
It's the Mountaineer Apple Butter Festival.
Yes,
And that
yes,
is
yes. And
That
we
is
should
a
have-
historical society, and then the Mountaineer side. But we've got a whole bunch of things going on. They're going to have axe tosses, axe throws.
We promised Harley and John when they were in here that we'd be out to that one, so we've got to go to that.
So again, that's October 2021, and we're going to make apple butter. The Historical Society makes and sells apple butter at that, and that's a
Great.
big fundraiser for
Right.
us. So folks understand the money when you come and buy apple butter, that goes into these programs and keeping things running for us.
Absolutely.
It's a big thing. So we appreciate everyone coming out and supporting us.
Absolutely. Well, you guys are doing the Lord's work for sure. I'm telling you that. It's a job preserving history for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But Josh, you want to take us out of here?
Sure. David, thanks again so
Yep.
much. I've learned so much. I've barely said 2 words, and I love that.
No, these are my favorite ones.
Yeah, me too. Everybody, please like and share this far and wide. Give us comments, give us likes, give us dislikes. If you don't like something, tell me why. Anything you do to comment or like it or dislike it gives us, it throws it out there in the algorithm, so it really helps us in the end. Even if you think you're hurting us, it actually helps us, even if it's a negative comment. Please go check out our merch at shophollercast.com. T-shirts, mugs, tumblers, shorts, all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, definitely go check out our merch. If you use the code HollerCast, it gets you 10% off, and all this stuff is really high quality, so it helps us keep the lights on here at the old HollerCast studio.
Amazingly high quality.
Amazingly.
It really is. It's some good stuff.
It is.
It really is. It's worth every dime of it, I'm telling you.
Absolutely.
Not only does it have our logo on it, it's actually worth a damn.
It is. It's high quality stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, share this out far and wide so people can really just understand how rich and amazing of a history that we have here in Mitchell County. But until next time, we love you all. Peace out.